name is Ayaka, and I am a TA and consultant with LSAT Unplugged here with Alyssa, running the admissions session. Thank you to Suchita, who ran the logic game. Awesome class right before. Awesome job. So today I really want to talk about letters of rec. And sort of get into the nitty gritty of like asking for one. What does it look like on LSAC? And I won't share the web page, but I've done it before, so I'll tell you like what you need to get beforehand to register the person to send your letter of rec and all of that. So let's get into it. I know Anna sent a link in the chat. Let me see, I'm on one screen today, so let me see if I can share my screen correctly. Here we are. All right, so everyone can see that, yeah? All right. Let's see, and then let me just pull up the chat just so I have it. And as always, if you have questions, comments, all of that, feel free to put it in the chat or come off mute. Happy to answer any questions. So letters of rec. I think this is more than anything probably the easiest part of your application because you are not the one who's doing a lot of the writing here. And however, if you have anxiety in asking people for things or stuff like that, that may be a hurdle that you need to get over. But you know, this is something that you do need to ask someone else to do for you. So number one, what is a letter of recommendation? It's a professor, a professional, someone who has overseen your work or seen you work, and have them write a letter that tells the school a little bit about who you are, the great work that you've done academically or professionally. And these can be, these can touch on characters about you, but they're not character letters. So don't ask your friend to write one for you. Do not ask your family friend who is a lawyer to ask or to write one for you. These are really professional and academic letters of recommendation, so you really want to, and so be careful about who you ask, but we'll get into that a little bit here in a second. So the basics, right? The law schools that most commonly will ask for 2 to 4 letters of recommendation in your application. Some may ask for more, and some may ask for less, but you're kind of in that 2 to 4. If you have 4 in your pocket, it might not be the best idea to send all 4 sometimes, and it might not be the best idea to send only 2. That it just really depends on your application, but we're in that range of 2 to 4. And I know there's some schools out there who are like, if you are out from, academia for more than 3 years, you don't need one from an academic professor. I like to say have one, because many schools will ask for one from a professor, from someone who knows you academically. So just in case there's a school that you're applying to that requires one, I say have at least one in your back pocket. You might not use it, but have it.
What's interesting, Ayaka, is that I know that like Columbia requires a professor. So there are schools that require a professor, but I've been coming across a lot more interviews lately where, say, like somebody has been out of school for many years. I've heard, and I think it just depends. So it always depends, reach out to the admissions. But something I learned along my journey that I was actually panicking about before was that if you've been out of school for a long time, they might understand if you don't have a letter from a professor. Like say you've been out of school for, I think I've heard the number 4+ years. Like me, I'm 29 years old. I happen to go to a small school. If I'd gone to a larger school, and the prompt does not require a professor, it might be okay to not have one. They might say like, yeah, we were kind of expecting that. What do you think about that?
I think that's great. And, people I've been out of school for now 6 years as well. So, the professors that I knew, that I've kept in touch with, they know me, but the people who I haven't, they don't know me as much anymore, and I haven't updated them about my life. So it may be hard for those people to go back and write letters. So I think you're right in that, some schools are more willing to not have that academic performance letter. The one caveat is if you have a addenda about your academic performance, I suggest having a letter from a professor that can speak to how strongly you showed up in a classroom, because that can enhance your addenda of being like, hey, let's say you didn't do well in a class because you really weren't interested in it, or you kind of pushed through a class that you just kind of had to, and so that kind of tanked your GPA. If you have an academic letter of rec from someone who says, no, this person can show up very strongly in a class that this person is interested in, and this is the way that they showed up, then that looks better, right? Oh, that's an academic addenda assistance letter sort of thing. So I think it really depends on your application, which is frustrating. However, yes, there are times when you can't get a professor. If you're, let's say you're 20 years out of school, sometimes you can't get a hold of a professor that you worked with while you were an undergrad. That happens. So I would just ask admissions in that case. But yeah, it all depends. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And now I have another question following up on professor. And really, all of my questions, like everything I have to offer, is because when I first started my application journey until today, talking to you right now, I have a completely different understanding of like what letters rec, like what kind of goes down. And something I found really interesting listening in on a lot of different interviews was, say, for example, you do get a professor and you have a letter recommendation from a professor and you're applying to a school that doesn't absolutely require from a professor. Like say you have like 2 letters of recommendation that are from professional backgrounds, and these 2 people know you really well and they can talk about you at length. And then you have a letter from a professor, and the professor actually talks more about their own class. Like, my class is very rigorous. My class only has 1 test. My class is only passed by, I'm going to say a crazy number, like 33%. It's not a good number at all, and this person passed. Like when they spend more time talking about their own class and saying like, this person got this grade in my class, I've heard that that actually can be like pretty like a big indicator that like, okay, like this professor doesn't actually know this person. And personal touch is more important than rigor of what you went through, what that person's describing in terms of like their own thing or something like that. Like if 2 people know you more than say the professor, would you say that that's a stronger letter of rec
Sure.
puzzle?
Yeah, I think so. And this kind of goes into the next page, but kind of you've got this on the nail. So I think it's important to figure out the person that's writing the letter, right? Is this person going to write a good and awesome and amazing letter for you, right? And I think in the professional sense, you've worked with a person enough that you know that they can write a good letter. And they might ask for like, what should they include in the letter, and you can influence that a little bit in that way. A letter from a professor, especially if you've had a little bit of time since you've graduated or taken a class with that professor, it might be a good idea to dig through your emails, your school emails, to see if you've emailed in assignments, or comments from a class, and kind of pull those up and send those to the professor so they kind of get a better picture and kind of remind themselves of who you were in that classroom. I think the best professor written letters are ones that can describe who you are in the classroom, not, and as you said, Alyssa, not the rigor of the class or not how difficult it is to get an A in the class. It's much more about how you performed in that class and how you showed up. Is this person an active participant in the class, or were they someone who just kind of sat in the back? And I would like to say that's not a great place to be if you're a person who sat in the back of the room and never raised their hand to get a letter from that professor, but sometimes that's the only choice we have. So we'll kind of talk about how to figure that route out, but in general, you really want to pick and choose who you're asking for a letter of rec. And can they, number one, can they write a good one? Number two, will they remember you? Number three, can they write one that kind of shows who you are in the classroom, who you are in the workplace? Does that make sense? Awesome. All right. So moving on, asking for a letter of recommendation. So after you've gone through like the whole, this person might be a good person to ask, this person's a good person, from work, from college, whatever. The asking part is probably the biggest like hurdle for getting the letter of recommendation, because I don't know about you, but I have this like big fear of being rejected and somebody saying no to me. So that was like the biggest thing. And most times I haven't had anyone say no. But I do know some people, they say, no, I don't remember you. I'm sorry, I can't write a good one for you. And that's them doing a service for you. If they say, I can't write a good letter for you, that's a service. So don't feel like you've been rejected. You'll find someone who will write a better one for you. So first off, be clear in what the letter is for. You're going to law school, and you would like to have them write a letter of recommendation for you. Give examples of what you want the recommender to include, like if it's character, if it's work ethic, if it's a project that you've done, etc. Give a deadline, give a very clear deadline, and don't make it the same deadline as the day that you want to apply, right? Because things can go wrong. People are busy. They can ask for an extra day. So don't cut it too close to when you're applying. And then explain the LSAT process. This one's a little tricky. And this one was one where I had to kind of go in and dig into LSAT a little bit to figure out what the process was. So essentially you register the person into your LSAT application, and you'll put their name, their contact information, their email, and I think they're like the title that you want to give their letter of recommendation. And once that's done, the LSAC system will send an email to the recommender, who then uploads the letter into the system. So you do want to explain that, and check in once you've done that process. Just give it a couple days and check in with your recommender to see if they actually got that email. Because many times once you send that email, people will see it, and then life goes on, right? And maybe it's a couple weeks before they are ready to upload a letter into the system. And so they'll forget that they've gotten the email. They forget where they put it. They can't find it in their inbox. So, check in, see if they got it, give them a couple weeks. I'm sure you'll be writing back and forth with the person. And, once they're like, hey, I feel like I'm ready to send in a letter, check in and say, hey, are you able to find that LSAC email? I can always refire. And there's always a way to refire that email from the LSAC portal. And then lastly, you want to get the recommenders, preferred name, title, contact information. You need to put that into the LSAC system. So make sure you have that. That's the basic that you need for asking for a letter of recommendation. There are people out there, especially professors, who are like, show me assignments, show me which classes you've taken with me. My professor that I've asked for a letter of recommendation, I've taken 7 classes with this guy. So I wrote every single one. I wrote like the most impactful projects, what grade I got, all of that. So really give as much information as possible, and so that they can use that as a starting off point of remembering who you are, remembering how you showed up in the class, and then write that great letter of recommendation that you want. Optional things that you can include. I didn't do this, but a copy of your personal statement. If you are one of those people who have, everything ready and all you need is a letter of recommendation, include that personal statement. it, it could tell the story of who you are, and they can maybe tap into that personal statement a little bit and write that recommendation letter so that's a cohesive application. It's not necessary. I don't see too many people doing it because not a lot of people have their personal statement ready as early as when they need to start asking for a letter of recommendation. And then other optional reference material. That's not just for academics. You also want it for, if you're asking for work recommendations. I went back, I think 4 years, and asked my boss from 4 years ago to write a letter of recommendation. And he was like, well, that's fine. I can totally do that. Remind me, some of the projects that we did together. And he was like, oh yeah, I remember doing that with you. So sometimes people just really need to jog their memory. And, I was like, oh yeah, I was on this like project around RSUs for the company, and we did tax stuff and stuff in America. And he was like, oh yeah, I totally remember now. So really just give them a lot of information. So that they can write that letter in a more meaningful way. And I think, Alyssa, you and I really talk about this in personal statements, but we don't want to be in like the high level, like this person's great, blah, blah, blah. Like you want the more impactful stories and concrete examples to come in so that it's not a highfalutin, this person's just great and we think this person will be a good lawyer.
You just made me think of something, Ayaka, that I've never really thought of it in this way. But like when you said like the high level, like I just got an image in my mind of like, this person's great, they got this grade, or like this person's fantastic to work with. Like instead of like high, airy kind of statements, like ground level, like get us on the ground with you. Like what did they do? How did they respond to stress? What accomplishments did they achieve in the face of like hardship, or how did they go above and beyond, or like general braininess, how are they in a team dynamic, like anything like that, like curiosity to learn, are they a really good learner? That's all. But I'm gonna actually hijack and now like switch gears and like actually mention something else that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of having, which is optional. So you have the personal statement and like examples, like this is what I did. But something that's been helpful lately in asking for people to do things for me is having like a pitch for myself, like an elevator line, a pitch of why I am going to law school. And in perfecting that, in practicing that, my application is shifting into a more focused, like well-rounded application, because I sort of have an idea of myself and I'm able to articulate myself. And also it helps in case you ever, if a school you're applying to does an interview, you've totally got that. Tell me about yourself, or like, why do you want to go to law school question down. So it really can't hurt to have like an elevator line or like a pitch, just like a 3-part. And I know we were just talking about this, but like when asking for a letter of recommendation to go to law school, you could potentially say like, I'm asking for a letter of recommendation to go to law school. This is why I want to go, and have like 2 sentences, 3 sentences that really land why it's important. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. But it's sort of like lights a fire under the person who could be writing it for you to like be on board with you and like see that you're focused and like see your vision, maybe potentially like you just look a little bit more organized.
Sure. And I love that. And I think that conversation can happen at differing times. So I have to say the people that I've asked for letters of recommendation, they know. I've told them over and over again over the years that I'm like, I want to go to law school, and all this. And I I remember I emailed my professor and I was like, now is the time. Like you get to write this letter that you've been wanting to write for years now. So that elevator pitch, great. And I think that's something useful to have if you're having that first conversation of like, hey, I want to go to law school and I would love to ask you for a letter of recommendation. I've asked that question. I've asked for a letter of recommendation 6 years ago from this professor. And every year I go and see him, not just, to ask for the letter, but just to keep that connection going and saying, hey, like, this is what my life is like. I don't think I'm ready to go to law school yet, but when I am, please do write a letter and keep that connection going. And, it's always make an appointment with him and then, see him and go get coffee and all that. So, that's really important to do. And I think give that elevator pitch throughout that time that you're asking for that letter of recommendation. So Cheetah,
I think that's where you and I differ, right? Because I had an entire career that had nothing to do with law school. And a lot of applicants have that. So that's a lot of people like, and I hear it all the time too, like people go through undergrad not planning on law school. Like maybe people are not talking about law school and like maybe they realize it's for them. And so I think that's definitely where having that elevator pitch, I would almost say if you have a career that you maybe haven't been saying that whole time, then the elevator pitch definitely even more necessary. Like definitely bring that to the table when you're asking for a letter of rec.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. So Cheetah, I see your hand up. A question?
No, not a question, just a comment. On Alyssa's point earlier too about like elevator pitch and having that, like you have helped me so much with like the drafting email. And like, and now that you mentioned and Ayaka, you also mentioned elevator pitch, like it could be like telling, asking your recommender through email, like why you want to go to law school. And if you ask for that Zoom meeting, right, during COVID, you can't meet in person. So even save that elevator pitch for the Zoom call. And then like you also brought up a great point, Ayaka, like meeting them often to kind of connect. Fun fact, like during the pandemic, the one professor that has given me my letter of recommendation, we would have a Zoom call where we just casual talk. And that's how we were able to like connect. And we literally would talk about the most random things, but also economics, because always, he's an economics professor, economics major. But anyway, just kind of keep that connection. And I mean, hopefully things are opening now, and I mean, more vaccination and stuff, maybe in person or still in Zoom, but that's really, really helpful. The elevator pitch and just keeping the connection. So I'm going to keep that in mind. I do mine.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, if you haven't, I met my professor once a year because I was living abroad. So whenever I was here and on vacation or, I had a work trip or something like that, I would make time to see him. But make sure you get an appointment. I know when I went to go see the professor and I made an appointment, he was like, oh yeah, there's another guy who asked for a meeting, but he never made an appointment. So I'm not, I'm not inclined to make the time for him. He needs to find the time with me. People are busy, and it's also common courtesy to ask for the time. And if you have more time with the person to connect, that's all the better. But yeah, it's professional courtesy there. So I think it's great, so Cheetah, that you were able to cultivate a relationship where you can check in and kind of talk about not just the letter but also beyond and about your life and all that, which is awesome. Professional letters as well, you really want to connect with a person who's going to write a great letter for you, and also you have to formally ask them as well. Don't just be like, hey, write a letter for me, I'm going to law school, bye. Like that's not really what you want to be doing. Alyssa, I see your hand up.
I have a hand up because I'm so interested in this conversation in terms of like, it seems to me like right now, like because there's only like us right now in this room, but there's like the Ayakas of the world who have been wanting to go to law school for a really long time, who were working abroad and they made appointments to see a professor like once a year and maybe are used to those sorts of like connections and that cadence. And then there's sort of like the me's of the world who I'm not visiting I happen to be someone who is like a professional artist. So I was like traveling all the time and not making it back to where my school was. I'm not visiting my professors once a year. I didn't know I was going to law school. That connection is not happening whatsoever. But something I wanted to ask is that I didn't know. I hope like somebody listening to this is the same as me, but I had no idea. Excuse me, my voice just cracked, that I could even talk to professors. And I know that that sounds crazy, but I was raised in raised in a violent home that basically taught me not to speak to authority figures, because if I spoke to authority figures, then like they would find out what was like happening at home. So like when you're raised in domestic violence or like domestically abusive situations like me, you're not talking to authority figures, and professors fall into that. And so when I first asked for my letter of recommendation from a professor, he said yes. He was like, I'd be happy to, like, let's do it. Let's jump on a Zoom call. And I just completely freaked out. I panicked. I was like, what do we talk about? Like, I've never spoken. He knew me because of the work I had done. I happen to be a very, very good student. But what do those conversations look like?
Sure. That's a great question. So I think let me caveat one thing. So when I was talking to this professor, and even my previous boss, who 4 years ago, so I always said to them, at some point I might want to go to law school. And in that case, I would love to get a recommendation from you. So it really wasn't, even graduating out of college, I was like, I don't know if I really want to go to law school. I don't know. I need to figure stuff out. I don't really know what part of law I want to go into, all of that. So the crisis happened. And so I put a pin in it and I said, hey, if I ever need a letter of recommendation, I'm going to want it from you. So please remember me. And he was like, yes, of course, I'm not going to forget about you. It's like all of that. So that's one thing. And that's one way to, if you are not planning to apply to law school right away, apply to, any sort of school right away, that's a great way to put a pin in it and say, I will reach out to you in the future for some sort of letter. And don't let that conversation end there. Continue to check in. As Alyssa, you pointed out, there are people who've never thought about going to law school, who didn't think they were going to go to any sort of school. And so either they didn't make the connections with the professor, or they just didn't have a conversation about letters until years and years after, which not a crime at all. And I think that happens a lot more than we think. In that case, part of it is picking that conversation up. And I would love to ask you, Alyssa, what that initial conversation looked like, and the anxiety level that comes with that, because I understand there's a lot of personal stuff in that, but kind of picking up that conversation, even for me to check in back with my professor every 6 months or every couple months, is almost anxiety for me. I'm like, oh, hey, do you remember me? He's like, of course I remember you. But and I don't know about you, but I have a lot of anxiety around like picking up conversations with people. So
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. That's like 100 bazillion%. I'm extroverted. I really enjoy meeting other people and talking with other people. But in this case, like, I feel like my feet just started to sweat, like just thinking about it. Like, I thought he was just like scheduling an interview with me to see if he was really going to go through with it. And like anyone listening to this, please don't enter that conversation thinking that. That's not a good way to enter any conversation. What's really interesting though is that he asked me, really, I thought the meeting was going to be 15 minutes, and I could tell just from his cadence that the meeting was actually like an hour and a half. And I wasn't prepared for that. So definitely set a time expectation whenever you're meeting with someone. And he seemed very relaxed. And again, I have an arts background. So he also has an arts background. So different types of professions have different sorts of like levels of interaction. But he asked me questions like, where do you want to go to school? What type of law are you interested in? Why do you want to do this? And he was not grilling me. He's a very kind person. But those are sorts of questions that I would absolutely, that's why I keep bringing in having the elevator pitch, because there's the Ayakas of the world who have all those questions answered. And then there's other people and other applicants where you know that it's a good fit for you. You know that you want to go to law school, but articulating those questions, maybe you haven't been thinking about them for 10 years. So those would be, if I could give any sort of advice, like he was really awesome and he actually took like a mentorship role with me and like talked options out with me. But absolutely, if I could give advice to anyone before they ask someone for a letter of recommendation, I know that I almost, I don't want to say I jumped the gun because it's fine timing, but I wanted to give them a lot of time. So the minute I knew I wanted to go to law school, I asked for my letters of rec. What I wish I could go back and tell myself was just have simple answers to that question. Like, why do I want to go? Exactly what kind of law am I looking into? Why am I looking into that law? Like, what schools I want to apply to? Why do I want to apply there? I had rough answers to that, but if I had advice for anyone, I'd like have those things answered because those are probably what the person writing the letter is going to ask you.
Yeah.
And that's what the other person, I have two professors. That's what the other professor asked me as well. Why do you want to go to law school? And I gave her an answer and she was like, she's also a mentor. And she said, okay, yeah, but why do you really want to go to law school? And having those answers clear, having an elevator pitch, and I wrote it in the chat, but I know that when these videos are published, the chat does not get published. So what you should have in your back pocket is like background experience, that moment that made you go, aha, like there's usually a moment. If you can't pin down a moment, try not to say like everything in my life made me want to go to law school. Just try to have a moment where you're like, this is the moment I knew I needed to go. And then talk about like what you've done, background, professional experience. Maybe like, did you take a job organizing something? Did you do something else? Like anything, it could be anything. Like for me, I started delivering pizzas because I knew as soon as I wanted to go to law school, I needed to pay off credit card debt. Like, any action that I took to help me get to the place that shows that I'm really serious about this and why you feel law education would benefit your future goals. So what's your aha moment? What have you done and what are you doing to get you there? And why do you need a law school education to like, what goals do you have? Why do you need that law school? If you can articulate those three things, then it's time for like you to ask someone to write a letter for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great. And I think that's a great starting off point for your initial conversation with your letter of rec writer, your recommender, I guess. And to be honest, I think this is totally valid and I love this and I wish I had this when I first asked for my letter of rec. I don't think any of my recommenders asked. Like they just knew that I wanted to go to law school. So, this is an example of like, it really depends on the applicant, right? In your application. I've said this for now 6 years. I'm like, I think I want to go to law school. I don't know, but I think I do. You're going to be a recommender in that case. And they know it. And, it's been years of conversation. So they know me. I don't need to explicitly tell them. Yes, but you want to, as Alyssa said in the chat, you want to be prepared if they ask. But yes, all of that. And I think that can also be in your initial email if you ask. I've emailed 2 people out of the 3 recommenders I have. 2 people I emailed and said, these are the things I'm looking for in a letter. Is this something that you can do? And kind of wrote in, all these things that, I've done during my time at the job. All of that. The professor had a form he had, and he was like, you need to ask me 8 weeks out and then check in with me 3 weeks out. And I was like, all right, he has a process. So, there's people who are really used to writing letters of rec and there's people who are not used to writing letters of rec. So, be flexible in that way. As Alyssa says, be ready to answer the why law school, what led you to that moment. And kind of begin the conversation. And to go back, probably 5-10 minutes ago to Alyssa, your original question of what happens in those conversations, after that initial ask, it's really a check-in for me. So it's like, hey, how's it going? What's going on in their life? What's going on in my life? I think the trajectory to law school is this. If you think it's still a couple of years out, I think it's still great to check in with your recommender, the person that you want recommending you, because you don't want them to see just a snapshot in time. You want them to see a progression. So, I worked with you on X, Y, and Z. I am now here at this company. I'm doing this. And these things that I learned from you are showing up in these ways, these interesting ways. And, I really want to continue the work. So I think it's good to have that connection and continue the progression. And then, when 6 months out, I say give them the warning 6 months out from when you plan to apply, to say, hey, I'm going to apply this cycle. I will give you more details, but this is the day that I would like to apply. Are you able to write a letter this year?
You want to know something else about the 6 months? Sorry, I'm just like,
No, go ahead,
must have
please.
had like chatty vitamins or something. You and I have talked about this before, Ayaka, where the 6 months out, if you're thinking I'm going to apply, like, how do I take, if I'm thinking to myself, I want to apply before January 1st, because that's part of like the earlier pool, like that just is giving me the best chance for scholarship. And I'm thinking, okay, 6 months out, and I'm going to get my application in before January 1st. And I write to my recommenders, like say June, I want to get this in. If you are asking for a professor, both of the professors that I asked both of them were like, great, I'm going to get that done during winter break. So they saw the winter break as an opportunity to like finish up all of their duties and then focus on the letter of recommendation. So also keep that in mind. I'm not saying that that's how that would be illogical, right? If I said that that's how every professor is going to respond. But if you're thinking to yourself that you want to apply in the spring, I would recommend that you write to your professors in November or December, and not January 1st, because then January 1st, they are starting their new cycle if they are on a semester basis. And then they have to take care of your letter within that cycle. So I don't know, just think about the winter break and how maybe they're the kind of person that wants to write it over Thanksgiving. Maybe they're the kind of person, American Thanksgiving. Maybe they're the kind of person that wants to write it over a winter break. So take the cycles of school into consideration if you're asking a professor. Not a big deal, but just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and so Chita, I see your question about asking them to resubmit. I think if they date their letters, you are going to want them to resubmit. I know my professor, he wrote a letter, and it starts with, because he asks people to start the letter for you, like just the first line to say, my name is blah blah, I'm writing a recommendation for this person for the 2020 cycle or something like that. And so you have to do the ask to change that. But beyond that, I think you can just say, hey, I pushed out my application for X, Y, and Z reason. Are you able to resubmit with an updated date? No need to change the content unless there's something that you really want changed. But I can't see into my letter. I've checked that whole, like, I won't look at the letter thing. So I don't know what it says, but I've sent the email to all my recommenders to say, like, hey, I've pushed out my application. If you've dated it in any sort of way, can you please update to the current date? And there's usually no pushback on that. So yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. I don't think. Yeah. So that's really the meat of today's, and thank you, Suchita and Alyssa, for kind of really actively participating here. I loved all the input and questions. Really just be very careful about choosing who you're getting the letter from. If you are still in school and don't know if you want to apply right away, keep those connections going. And be able to kind of set yourself up for success and being able to pick that conversation up with a professor, advisor, whatever. And I love the elevator pitch from Alyssa. Have those answers in your head before going into a conversation, because they may very well ask. Yeah, so and you can find the actual instructions to how to get a letter of rec submitted in LSAC. So, I'm not going to go into detail here, but the instructions are there. So please take a look. Yeah.
I have another, it sounds like you're wrapping up, but something that happened to me, and I just want to, like, if anybody else is listening to this, like, kind of just like cover bases that at least happened to me, an individual, because surely they're going to happen to someone else. So I'm not LSAC, so call LSAC for all these details, but say, like, what's the difference between if you have someone and they say, what school do I write it to? And you might say, oh, I'm going to submit the one letter to all of the schools that I'm applying to, which is possible. And that person's going to address it to whom it may concern, just to all schools. And it goes into a portal to all schools. I happen to have someone writing a recommendation letter that said, no, this is too important. I want to address it to every single individual school you're applying to. And that's doable. You just have to make sure that they're on board, because you as the applicant don't have control over what portal it gets sent to. They have to match it to the exact portal to that school. So you have to make sure that they are aware of that process, just as you've said, Ayaka. But this is what I really want to point, and I want to give this advice to anyone, because a woman from LSAC that worked for LSAC gave it to me. And that's just make sure that if somebody is writing to each individual school and they want to, ask them to also write a letter that is to all school, a generalized letter. That way, at the last minute, if you decide that you're going to apply to another school, maybe a safety school, maybe a reach school, you're not stuck with the list of schools that they wrote to, and make sure you articulate that's the reason. If they want to do it to every school, just say, yeah, sure, that's great. Make sure they understand the extra lift involved with that. And then also ask them at the end of the day, always ask anyone for a generalized letter to all schools, just in case you just never know. You might go to apply to a school that you weren't thinking of last minute.
That's great advice. And I think, I mean, the other part to that is not everyone knows the list of schools they're applying to as they've asked for the letter of rec. As I said, I think 6 months out is a great point to start asking. And at that point, I mean, I still don't know the list of schools I'm applying to. I'm still researching. The more I listen to the interviews that we're doing recently, and going back into the archives that Steve has put up on YouTube, it's like the more options that I'm seeing. And so I'm like, yeah, at first it was like 3-4 schools. Now it's a list of 15, right? And that can get bigger, that can get smaller. And so Suchita put a great point in the chat, is like, you have to respect people's time, right? And it's really hard to be like, oh, I was going to apply to these 15 schools. Actually, no, I'm going to apply to 10. I'm going to actually apply to 20, like, kind of doing that back and forth. It's a little, from a professional standpoint, I've been working for 6 years, and people here, Alyssa, Suchita, you guys know, it's a little ridiculous if you're going back and forth on an ask. The ask needs to be clear in the beginning, and it's okay for things to change, but just, it's, you want to keep it flexible. So I do love the idea of having a general letter.
Right. Just ask them for a general letter. Say, sure, absolutely, this is the list of schools.
Yeah.
And then just say, can you also do a generalized letter? That way you limit like the back and forth, or you just never know. What about this? Like, a frequently asked question is, what if I have somebody who's an alumni at the school? Does that give me a better chance?
Does that mean, sorry, you got the question, so I don't think you know the background to the question, but I think, so if you have not worked professionally with an alumni, like, let's say,
you're saying that them just being an alumni alone doesn't give you a better chance.
No, absolutely not. I think let's say like you work in a law firm and you've worked with an alumni there and they know your work ethic and all that, that's a great letter to have, because they could say like, hey, I was at that school. I think this person would be a great fit to the school because X, Y, and Z, right? But if it's like, hey, I was an alumni, and oftentimes I've heard this question, alumni, but not of the law school, alumni that is from like the medical school or something, right? And under the same university, I don't know if that's a good letter to have.
I think the better relationship, and I bring it up because I was just speaking to someone this week that had said to me, don't worry about it. They're an alumni. I made sure that they said that they're an alumni. And I was like, well, that's not a good way to look at it. So if somebody's in the course, I want them to know. I think the better relationship to prioritize is how well they know you. Like bottom line, it's more important how well this person knows you than what their status is. That's it. If their status outweighs how well they can speak personally and directly about you, I would rethink it. Just prioritize that relationship to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're 100% right there. So
I've also heard, I don't just like on one tonight, but I've also heard too, that people talk about like wait list. Okay, it's no secret that there's a rise in applications. The stay-at-home orders made people reflect and also give them time. That means a lot of the law school applications are happening. So there's a rise in applications. And I've heard from admissions officers, like if it comes down to two applicants that are similar, the letter of recommendation can push someone into that acceptance pool. I've heard it. And in terms of like, can somebody speak powerfully to your ability to succeed in school? And if someone writes like this much, like 3/4 of a page, like this person's really great, that high ground, and somebody else has a recommender that I'm not trying to force anyone to like force their writer to write a long message, but they're going on and on about this person has what it takes. This person is resilient. This person will add value to your program. I know that you started out this session saying a letter of rec, probably the easiest part of the application because you're not doing it. I would challenge that and say the way that you set up, like everything that you've done such a beautiful job here tonight of like setting up those conversations, presenting information to them that can help them write a stronger letter, following up with them, giving them 6 months. Like if somebody were to take all your advice, Ayaka, that's still like an amount of work that I would, not to be dramatic, but like it could make a difference. So don't sleep on it is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. I think, you're right in that I've been on this journey for a while. So I feel like accumulatively, yes, it's a lot of work, but I'm on the tail end of it and I'm like, all right, it's time to ask for that letter that I've been asking for 5-6 years now. So, and that's kind of why I'm like, oh, it's probably the easiest part. I don't have to study for it. I don't have to write multiple drafts. However, the commit that you have to make, or the leap that you have to make in terms of self-doubt and all that, like in asking someone that you haven't connected with for probably many years, stuff like that, that's a big ask. So I understand what you're saying, Alyssa, and I think it goes into you choosing the right person to ask the letter, and then getting them to write the right content. Those are the two big things here. Really the other stuff is kind of the bells and whistles, but choosing the right person, right content. And you have to be prepared to say, these are the things that I want you to say in my letter. And kind of, you have to do that reflection for them. We've worked on this. I want you to highlight this about me. I remember one of my my professional letters. This guy wrote like 4 pages. It's like, yo, we can't do 4 pages of a letter of rec. Like, I love that you wrote that, but we can't do 4 pages. So, and he was like, do you think 4 pages is too long? I was like, yes, I think it's too long. So we had to pare it down, and I was like, well, can you talk about this, this, and this? And he was like, yeah, of course, I've already written about it, so that's all good. So, it's, the letters are important. It can make a no a yes in the application process. It can make a wait list into a yes. We hear it all the time. It can also make, if your letter of rec is not great, is kind of like the wishy-washy sort of, oh, this person would be a good candidate, it would be a good lawyer, that's it, and there's no concrete examples or no like personal touch to that, it can make a maybe a no. Right. So really, it is important. It really is important, and you don't want to let it slide. You don't want to let it go and be like, oh, I'll just ask the 3 people that I know. Right. You really want to choose. You know, these should be from people who know you, who know your work ethic, who know how you work and how you think and all that. So really cultivate those relationships, and then if you know that you're not going to ask for it right away, put a pin in that conversation and make sure that they know that that's coming sometime in the future. Awesome.
That's really well said.
Yes. Awesome. Alrighty. Well, thank you all for participating. I love this conversation. It was a lot bigger conversation than I was expecting. So
I'm so sorry. I actually have one more question.
Sure.
Do you have Whew, I'm so glad that you're my friend, Ayaka, because if you weren't, I would not feel comfortable like butting in this much. I guess I gotta
We're all friends here.
Just so everyone knows, I am terrified every time I speak. Like I'm sweating right now. And I just force myself to do it because I think it's for the greater good of like just getting us out. But what are your opinions on, there's actually an option in LSAC. Is there where it says like, have you viewed your own letter?
Yeah. I say don't do it.
It's just,
yeah, it's not great. And you can get a sense, and I'm sorry if I am like out of touch, but I think I can get a good sense of what's being written in the letter. But some people might not, right? And especially, I can understand this, especially if you're kind of coming out and saying, hey, like, I'm newly interested in law school, I need a letter, so I'm going back to a professor. That can be really hard to read in terms of like what this person might say. But I think that's something that you need to have a conversation, not just once, not just twice, but a couple times with the person, and saying, hey, are you able to write a powerful letter for me? These are the things that I'm looking for in my letter. Is that something that you can include? They may say yes, and you might get like, oh, I don't know if that's a good yes or a bad yes. And they may say no. So kind of take that as you will. But by the time the person is actually writing the letter, I hope you have a good sense of what they're going to write. And you should have a good sense of what they're going to write and how that's going to come off. So I personally don't feel a need to write, like, check off the whole, like, I want to read the letter. I'm comfortable with saying this is confidential to the school. And after your application, after you get in somewhere, you are able to see those letters after. So you might find out that someone didn't write a great recommendation letter for you, maybe. But I do know that my professor specifically asked if I was going to check that off, because he was like, well, in that case, if you are going to read the letter before you send it to the school, I have to think about 2 perspectives when writing. And I was like, no, don't worry about it, I'm not going to look at it. And he was like, okay, great. So that's not him saying, well, if you're going to look at it, I'm not going to feel comfortable writing something about you. It's more, he's saying, he wants it to come off in a certain way, and he doesn't have to think about my perspective as well as the school's perspective, so he can write more powerfully. So really, I would say talk to your recommender if that's a point of contention for you.
that was so Well put, Ayaka. You amaze me. That's great.
Yeah. I've thought about letters of rec for too long. So clearly. Alrighty. Well, happy to answer more questions, Alyssa, if you have any. But thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.